It's a clue in the crossword puzzle that I'm doing. Me neither. Well, I mean, you don't know what I'm going to say. That might be safer for me. Fair, fair. Um, Former tech executive.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Mental Health Chat. I am Mental Health Matt, as you may have gathered. I'm the host. And with me today is Gianna Puerini. Welcome, Gianna. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I'm super psyched.
Cool. So Gianna, your story is a long one. You've been involved in corporate America in a number of different ways. But the description we've got here for you is former tech executive. Do you want to give us a brief rundown of your career and what kind of involvement you've had?
Sure, and I appreciate you calling out how long my
I
experience
didn't mean it in that
is.
way. I didn't mean it in that way. I didn't mean it in that way.
No, yes, I have had a long career in tech. So the short version, I grew up on the East Coast in New England, and after college, where I majored in communications and marketing with a minor in psych, mainly because I deemed it the most flexible thing to do because I had
Mm-hmm.
no idea what I was going to do in life. So I did that and went into advertising and marketing for a little while and kind of fell into technology by
Mm-hmm.
taking a marketing job at a small technology company. I actually lived in Charlotte, North Carolina for a while, which was
Mm-hmm.
bizarre to go live in the South for me. It was a different experience. Made my way back to New York City and joined Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which was great. It was a fantastic opportunity to be at a small outpost of a very big company. Microsoft was already pretty successful by then. Did that for 5 or 6 years, and then Microsoft moved me out here to Seattle um, in 2003
Mm-hmm.
to, I don't even remember what their job was, and I made the job up. They it was something to do with emerging markets, which at the time was what they called the BRIC countries,
Mm-hmm. Brazil,
Brazil,
Russia,
Russia,
India,
India,
China.
and
Yeah.
China.
Yeah.
But I realized very quickly that Microsoft corporate and Microsoft out in the field in New York City was just a whole different vibe, not bad or good,
Mm-hmm.
but not the best fit for me.
Right.
So even despite all the wonderful people and challenges I had there, good challenges. And so I decided on a whim. I literally went and I was like, all right, I got Starbucks and I got Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
I like coffee and I like reading. Like at the time, Amazon was basically a bookseller. And so on a whim, I went to amazon.com/jobs. I applied for a job that I didn't understand the title of, but I
Mm-hmm.
figured like whatever. And very shortly thereafter, joined Amazon in 2003,
Wow.
not too long after I moved out here,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully did it without burning too many bridges with my friends at Microsoft, and then planned on staying for 3 years and
Mm-hmm.
then moving
Yeah.
somewhere. Actually, London was top of the list.
Oh,
I
cool.
always wanted
Okay.
to live in London.
Awesome.
But my plan was just to throw a dart, see what
Right.
happened. But I met my husband, my now husband, who was my second husband,
Mm-hmm.
and ended up staying. And I've been here ever since. And
Wow.
up until 2 years ago, was with Amazon, other than a 1 year little break in the middle there that I took off.
Wow. Okay. And so you started with Amazon. 2003 sounds like it would have been around the time that maybe Amazon was definitely nowhere near as well known as it is now, right? It was. You said it was mostly a
Oh gosh.
book company to start with, right?
Yeah, the context. In fact, I wanted to give quick context because I know most of your audience is probably younger than me by a
Mm-hmm.
lot. So when I joined tech, like people were just starting to use computers at work. Like
Right.
I did training on how to double click a mouse at factories and things. So it was, it was definitely the early days, and I thought, maybe this will catch on. This is cool.
Mm-hmm.
But when I joined Amazon, yeah, it was pretty much books. We sold DVDs and CDs at the time
Yeah.
also. But as an example, one of the early businesses that I started and worked on was jewelry and watches,
Wow.
wristwatches
Okay.
and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge, no one would pay attention to us. Like
Mm-hmm.
we didn't get press. No one really cared what we did. One of my objectives that year, I'll never forget, was 4 times a year, you have to get someone to write an article about your store.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
you have to get someone to pay attention. You have to do something interesting enough that 4 times a year they will write about Amazon
Mm-hmm.
on this front. And so, yeah, it was you nailed it, a completely different time, and a very lucky time to join, just from the chance of, when you're small, it was very small. You get to do everything. I was a junior person. I got to be in the room, as
Mm-hmm.
they say, for lots of stuff, because there just wasn't that many people. And you
Right.
got to do whatever you wanted. You had to
Mm-hmm.
wear every hat. There were always problems. And if you jumped in and fixed it, you got to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That sounds like it sounds like a very dynamic environment, and maybe also a stressful one at times.
Yeah, yes, it is stressful. And I will give the caveat that early in my career, I managed it very poorly, but I'll certainly give my perspective. And it mostly has to do with Amazon due to the proportion of time, obviously. But
Sure.
I think there's two things that make tech a stressful environment, like at a broad level. One is the nature of the beast itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly fast moving. Even at a company like Amazon now, where you're really big, you are afraid of two guys or two gals in their garage every second of every day.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen quickly. If there's a bug on the website, customers are suffering.
Mm-hmm.
The business never closes. All these things are sort of inherent to the business, but they do elevate the stress level. And then on top of that, you're in an industry that values your brain above all else. So you don't necessarily have to have the best social skills. You don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily have to be able to sell a product, but if you can write elegant code, think about elegant solutions, design things well for customers, your brain's your currency. So there's stress in thinking, especially, into your angle with mental health. You don't want to feel like, oh no, there's something wrong with the most valuable thing I
Right.
bring to this table, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that adds a little bit of stress. And the other two things I think inherent to, or a couple of things, like I said, the business never closes.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's always on call, right? Now it's better these days because computers can help a lot. But back when I was launching stores, you were on the phone at 2 a.m. running through all the systems. Are we
Mm-hmm.
ready to go? Are we ready to go? And some developers were up all night, bug bashing and filing tickets. So it just never closes, and there's very few finish lines.
Mm-hmm.
You launch a product, and immediately the next day you're supporting it.
Right.
You might have a party, but you're finding more bugs. Customers are having problems. You might not be in stock, all the things. So I think that, combined with the nature of invention, which has an incredible amount of ambiguity,
Mm-hmm.
leads to sort of the nature of the beast aspect of high stress. And then the second aspect of high stress is the way the businesses operate. And I say this, high stress sounds like it's bad. The way these businesses operate, I actually love. I
Mm-hmm.
admire it. I helped, in some cases, was lucky enough to help build how we operate.
Mm-hmm.
But they're incredibly metrics driven. And there's a ton of transparency, and there's really nowhere to hide. And
Yeah.
that's not a bad thing. It
Mm-hmm.
really isn't, but you got to bring your A game. So like, as an example, as a business owner or a member of a business, we would sit in something every week called WBR, which was the weekly business review. And it could, if you were a small business, maybe it was 10 people. If you were a big business, maybe it was 400 by the time Amazon was bigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you were expected to know inside and out everything that went on, whether it was bugs in the software, projects we were working on, why we didn't sell as many, whatever, that week. You did hours of prep to be ready for this. So the transparency, which was amazing, and the ability for anyone to ask a question or anyone to challenge anyone, no matter their hierarchy or level, creates a lot of stress, especially for
Mm-hmm.
certain personality types, like an introvert,
Mm-hmm.
who maybe doesn't want to speak out or would rather sit back. So I think the things that are valued in that environment and make those environments so innovative and so operationally excellent also just carry with them a lot of pressure. The ability to communicate clearly and crisply and efficiently is valued incredibly highly. So I think all those things, it just creates sort of a bit of a high pressure world that yet achieves its goals. So there's an interesting tension present.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It sort of sounds like, on the one hand, that sort of high stress environment. It sounds like it might be ripe for a lot of turnover, right? In the sense that people might come in and decide it's not for them. But on the other hand, I would assume that anybody, once they get into that environment, once you kind of start thriving in that environment, it sounds like it's the kind of thing that you sort of can't go back to like just a normal sort of sedate, like regular 9 to 5. Is that kind of like an approximate way of how it is?
For me, I can't speak for everyone. I think that's a very personal thing. For me, and I didn't recognize some of this, I guess you'd call it a privilege in a way. Amazon was like a magic fit for me culturally. It was all the things that are my natural tendencies, good or bad, hopefully mostly good. So for me, yes, it is very hard. The first time I left Amazon and I was like, wow, the rest of the world, I forgot what normal looks like. My brother said to me at one point, I was doing something and he looked at me, and he's really chill. Sometimes I wonder if my brother has a pulse. He's super chill. And he's a healthcare professional, so he's really caring and all the things. And he said to me, and he was like, you and Brian, and Brian's my husband, he's like, you guys are really intense. And I was like, you think so? Like, it didn't occur to me. And then I realized I was only surrounded by people who were often very like me and very like us. So yeah, I do think you would probably in the old days very quickly realize if this was right for you or not. As the company grew up, it did get better at recognizing we are attracted. You look at your team and you're like, wow, we're kind of a little too similar here. And we got much better at ways to deal with that, because that doesn't build the best team.
Right. So did you start actively seeking out people who maybe previously wouldn't necessarily have been as good of a fit?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, absolutely. And I can't remember about when. The great thing about Amazon was within your little Amazon is run like a series of small startups. So taking my last role, which was building and launching Amazon Go, which is a physical store, I had an incredibly wonderful, high pressure, but exciting amount of control over my little world. The Amazon culture was sort of the overarching thing, but I could implement things in my team to drive whatever I wanted to based on the needs of my team. So in our group, we did some things like, I had a super dorky analogy called the leadership sandwich.
Okay.
Because we were in the food business. And we always talked about, when you build your team, if I'm this kind of person, the people I hire, I'm going to very specifically look for the things that are not me.
Yeah.
And then the level below them, like what I used to tell the team, especially more junior people, is nobody wants a sandwich with all bread.
Right.
Like, that's a very boring sandwich. You need like other stuff to make it tasty. So we started implementing, as we promoted people or as we hired people, we'd start to look at and say, okay, what does this person bring that the team doesn't already have? Or what do they, what specific, maybe a personality type or a skill set that we don't have, because that kind of diversity is going to build a better product at the end of the day. I'm super pragmatic. It's about building the best product.
Right.
And I will do just about whatever it takes to do that. And it's similar in the, with mental health, like happy, productive people typically build better products for customers.
Yeah.
So therefore, even if I were cold and unfeeling, I would want my people to be happy and healthy.
Right.
It's a pretty simple equation, and diversity of personality types and things is similar. And I think what Amazon taught me to do that was very useful, and many tech companies function the same way, is create mechanisms. You cannot rely on good intentions. Good intentions are nice, but they don't get shit done.
Right.
So like one of my personal mechanisms is when I get out of bed in the morning, right after I brush my teeth, the very first thing I do is put on workout clothes. Because it's my way of making sure I don't give myself a chance to slack. That's just my little personal mechanism. For stuff like this, you also have to put mechanisms in place that combat your brain's natural tendencies, your human natural tendencies to maybe not be good at some of these things where bias and other stuff is in play.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it sort of sounds like building a team that can function in terms of having the highest productivity or producing the best product while also keeping everybody's well-being in mind. It sounds like that's its own sort of strange kind of alchemy, really, because I can imagine that at a certain point, the dynamics of people within the team start to become very important in terms of how the team's going to work over a longer period. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so the more you can create norms and mechanisms for your team,
Mm-hmm.
most of my recent experience, I was the leader, so I'll probably err on the side of talking about that. But I started as a junior person too, and was the member of a team.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's true. But if you give your people the right tools, so here's an example: we knew that what the industry euphemistically calls burnout was like a real thing.
Right.
And at Amazon, the message it was always, you own it.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I wanted to take an afternoon off, I could. There was a lot of flexibility, but it was up to me
Mm-hmm.
to manage it. And I failed many, 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 many times in my career at doing that. So we did something, it was probably in my last year or two, and several other leaders did it also, called work-life harmony norms.
Oh, okay.
And it was one page, and it said, we know that even though we tell people you don't have to be connected 24/7, if you get an email at 10 at night, you don't have to answer it.
Mm-hmm.
That's good intentions. The mechanism was that we created a rule that if it was after a certain time, I can't remember if it was 5 or 6 p.m., that if you wanted an answer that night, the onus was on the sender to specifically label the email in a specific way
Mm-hmm.
that told the recipient, this is actually urgent.
Yeah.
And urgent usually meant a customer is being affected or customers are being affected. That was kind of like really all that would hit the urgent bar, or maybe preparation for a Jeff meeting or something.
Sure.
And so we created a whole bunch of stuff like that. Meetings are not to be scheduled after this time. No recurring meetings that any teammate has an issue with due to childcare or what have you. So when you give people these mechanisms, put your workout clothes on first thing in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and you support them, you can hopefully make some progress in helping them achieve a harmony that works for them.
Right. Yeah, and I think that it's funny because I think that works on an individual level too, right? And you kind of mentioned your own mechanism for how to make sure that you work out in the mornings and things like that. I think that there's a lot of emphasis placed culturally on goals and what we want to move towards, and having a, like, let's say your goal might be I want to work out every day, but goals ultimately are achieved as a product of a system that creates an end product, right? And whether we're managing a team or whether we're managing our own mental health, managing our own lifestyle, creating a system that engineers an outcome is something that it's liable to be a lot more consistent and over time it's going to be more reliable than just setting a goal and hoping that you get there, I suppose, right? Would you agree with that?
Oh gosh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
The shortcut for that is hope is not a plan.
Right.
I mean, there were moments where I've, had to say that or had to tell myself that, because so it is natural to want to rely on good intentions. Like, people are good. We all have the best stuff in mind, but you know what? It doesn't work. And over my many, many failures, I would say, especially when I was having more mental health challenges early in my career, I would say it was only the last 7 to 10 years I actually developed my own list of mechanisms, and there's a lot that helped me manage my own mental health at the time, my professional health, now my health with the volunteering I'm doing, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of lesson about systems is important for everybody who's watching to kind of take home, because I think there's an assumption that people make where that they think that mental health is its own thing, and the same principles that apply there don't apply elsewhere, or that principles that you can apply, in the workplace, or a principle that might apply in a certain professional context, you can't also apply that to an individual because everybody's different. But while everybody's different, of course, there are things that we have in common, right? And of course, there are things that we can do and that we can use. There are techniques that we can use to to help improve our own experience of life. I'm curious if there's anything else that you picked up during the course of your career, maybe at Amazon, maybe elsewhere, anything that maybe started as something from a from a work perspective that actually ended up being a big benefit to you personally. Any perspectives or models or anything like that?
That's a great question, Matt. I think there's a few. The first one I would say is inventing and innovating as a job taught me to behave in my personal life in a way where I manage tasks at a micro level, but I don't plan at a macro level too far ahead.
Right.
And what I mean by that is when you're building a product in the early days, and you and I talked about some of this when we were talking about what you've started, there are so many unknowns. 20 ideas are going to fail. 20 are going to get thrown in the trash before they see the light of day. All the things happen, right? And so planning at a macro level too far ahead is just silly. Like people used to ask me, like when I'd get interviewed and stuff, what do you see for, this landscape in 10 years? And I would kind of try to very politely say, I mean, here's some thoughts on the way we're going, but like, you just can't do that. And I found that very helpful in my personal life too. So like, I plan my time and the things I know keep me sane at a very micro level, almost like what they do in 12-step programs, like one day at a time.
Right.
Like today is a cardio day. I'm going to do cardio. Today, I'm going to study for the LSATs, like for an hour. That's what I'm doing today. Versus like, here's what I'm doing with my life. I have no idea what that sort of thing has certainly helped me. That balance of what do I have to actually know right now? What do I really have to care about right now? And ignoring the things I can't necessarily 100% control. And the second, and I've told you about this, and I have so many, so you can tell me to shut up, but
No,
it's actually something my assistant did for me, and she didn't realize it, but she figured me out really well. Like you had to be pretty senior at Amazon to get an assistant. So once you did, it was very lucky. And my assistant was so talented and so insightful and so creative. She knew me and my group inside and out. And she used to create for me what she called yellow time on the calendar. And they were blocks of time where she would look and say, you're going to be not happy. I can see based on your week, you have this, you have that. This is awful. You're doing 12 interviews. You've got to write 3 documents, whatever. I'm giving you 2 hours of yellow time. If you schedule over it, I'll kill you. And yellow time was when I got to sit in my office, catch up, maybe do some thinking and whiteboarding. I took what she did for me and basically like moved it to my whole life. So to balance the things I knew to balance. So the one I think I had mentioned to you was, and this is obviously pre-quarantine, but if I do too much extrovert activity in a week, I know my mental health deteriorates a little.
Yeah.
There's only so much of other people. There's only so much that I can do. So that's orange on the calendar. And I would look at my calendar, and if I saw too much orange, looking at the week ahead, which I always do on Sunday, then I could adapt it before it became an issue.
Right.
I'm lucky. I'm old. I've had a lot of time to make all the mistakes and figure out the ones that like work for me. So, so yeah, I have a host of things like that are very, very simple, but just sort of keep me in check on the things I know set me off in maybe not the best direction.
Right. Yeah. That's really that's an important thing to have the self-awareness to be able to understand or preempt, I'm probably going to feel a little bit rough after this period of time. Therefore, I need to kind of slack off, or therefore I need to go easy on myself for a while. And getting into this habit where instead of just trying to go flat out 100% all the time, we have sort of cycles, and we have, periods where we're allowing ourselves to take stock and have time to ourselves, as opposed to just kind of racing towards burnout. And then, we just get to a point where we just have to stop, and our brains are just telling us, slow down,
Yeah. And that's a terrible place to be. I have been there multiple times, and I'm sure you and others have experienced too. And it sucks.
It does. Yes, it definitely
so
does.
The best way to, let's avoid the problem altogether where we can, right?
Yeah, exactly. We actually have our first question come in from one of our regulars on the channel, Smithy. Can a company like Amazon ever get to be as big and successful as it is if it was always being considerate of everything its employees need? So I guess that's a I suppose that's more of a framing in terms of
Mhm.
how the corporate environment operates and how profit is prioritized versus or growth is prioritized versus taking care of employees. I don't know what your experience would say in that regard as to whether Amazon
Yeah.
has ever had to make any sacrifices in that area, maybe.
It's such a tough question because Amazon has changed so much over the
Mm-hmm.
time I was there, and now it's so big. And
Mm-hmm.
even my last 7 years there, I was in a little startup and didn't speak to anyone because
Mm-hmm.
we were confidential. But I'll tell you my experience because I did have a time at Amazon where I needed that kind of support.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Amazon has gotten very big and successful, and tenure um, was pretty good. You know, people weren't running out the doors. Now that said, no company's perfect, but my personal experience was Amazon showed up when it mattered. So
Mm-hmm.
and Microsoft too, frankly, in my experience, and those are my only two big company experiences. Um, the great thing about a big company, and my heart goes out to startups and places like that, is the resources are there.
Mm-hmm.
Even when we were a young company, when I first started, there was still an HR person, like a
Mm-hmm.
human resources person who knew what to do and who to call and how to help. And I had insurance, like at Microsoft. I mean, I never would have been able to go to therapy if Microsoft didn't cover my therapy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think one of the benefits of these large companies is the resources are there. Now you still need the wherewithal to either ask for them or have a perceptive manager or colleague or
Mm-hmm.
HR partner who says, hey, I think you might want to
Yeah.
look at some of this stuff. But the great news is when you need it, it's there. And my personal experience is the moments I needed it, the company was there for me. And the company, you know, things like take the time you need, do what you
Mm-hmm.
need to do, go home. Like, and I tried to foster that environment on the team. I think the hard thing is there's a lot of pressure not to admit it. Of, you
Mm-hmm.
know, especially as a woman, I didn't want to admit in any weakness in any way.
Right.
Um, uh, but I do think that the things are available, which is a huge privilege. And like I said, I mean, there were times I wouldn't have been able to be in therapy
Mm-hmm.
had it not been for having like a great benefits plan and
Right.
things like that. So I mean, I don't want to overlook some of the simple stuff
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned one thing there that I think is kind of interesting. You mentioned the idea, particularly of being a woman in the corporate environment, and how that that might make you more reticent to sort of say, "I'm having a rough time." Like, do you think that the stigma that maybe might have existed, perhaps in some pretty extreme forms in the past, regarding women in corporate America, does that still exist, or do you think that's eroding a little bit?
Oh, I think it's definitely eroding. I mean,
Okay.
I started as a woman in tech in the South.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let you use your imagination. But let's just say I was not allowed to go to the city club, which was where every important meeting happened,
Mm-hmm.
in pants. I had to wear a skirt.
Yikes.
And there was a room that was for men only. So, like, you know, that
God.
was the mid 90s in the South.
That's the
It is,
90s? That's
I know, can you believe
not
that?
the 1890s, the
Yeah,
1990s.
no,
Jeez. Oh my
crazy
gosh.
town. And that, and I was lucky because I had studied a lot of this in college. So I had the benefit of being aware of our natural biases, both as men and women. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go in unarmed, but it has dramatically improved. It's not perfect because we're human
Mm-hmm.
and there is still a long way to go. But I was a very pragmatic person, like as I approached my career and remained that way right to the end and will be so whatever comes next. And I simply looked at it as I look at everything, which is I have to get from point A to B.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the things I know about what is between me and A and B. And a lot of times there was other humans in between me and what I needed for
Mm-hmm.
success at that, you know, on my project, for my customer, whatever. And I was okay adapting around that and manipulating it if I needed to.
Mm-hmm.
I was very lucky in my first tech job. The CEO of the company was a woman, which was super rare. This was in Charlotte. And she taught me early. She said, listen, it's okay. Like there are things stacked against you. So you just use what you have.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that was maybe a better sense of empathy, maybe
Mm-hmm.
understanding the people across the table a little better and being able to say things in a way that I knew would be palatable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, was I the best proponent for women's rights? Maybe not, but my thought was the only way to make change is to get to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And if I do not do anything to harm anyone else or myself, and I do not do anything unethical, pretty much everything else is on the table for getting from point A to B. And then that, then I hopefully can have even more positive impact. But luckily, dramatic changes over my career in tech.
Cool. Well, that's good to hear. It certainly sounds like we're on a positive trajectory there. As far as overall the trajectory of the corporate environment, whether it's Amazon or elsewhere, do you feel like we're on a positive trajectory in a general sense in terms of how companies take care of their employees?
It's hard. I want to caveat that I've now been out for 2 years, and I think I have to imagine COVID is having a dramatic effect on the way companies think about that.
I expect so.
So my stepson, for instance, he actually works at Amazon. He didn't tell us he was going there. He just called us one day and said, I got a job at Amazon. And he's still there. And he was talking about how hard it's been because he's got 2 little kids at home, my grandkids. And the first thing I asked him was, does your boss have kids? And he said, yeah, she has a 2-year-old. I said, you're fine. Because empathy is 90% of this battle, right? So I think I imagine the point being, I imagine it's changing dramatically, but yes, I do very much think like everything else has evolved. It's imperfect. It's not totally there, but it has evolved. Certainly as a manager early in my career, I did not pay as much attention to that kind of thing as I did my last few years.
Right.
So even just personal experience, I evolved dramatically as a leader, trying to at least create an environment where that was okay to talk about.
Yeah, that's
and I didn't succeed fully, but
sure. I mean,
yeah,
exactly. I think so the interesting thing that comes to mind there is you sort of mentioned that idea that in the early days you had to develop a kind of a pragmatic approach to trying to use the skill set that you had available to you to make progress in that sense. Do you feel that in the early days, did it feel like a very competitive environment in like an adversarial sense, or was it more just a question of each person having a different skill set that they use in different ways?
I never felt adversarial, and throughout my career, I never really felt that way. I mean, at the end of the day, all these things, remember, nobody really has bad intentions. I mean, obviously, there's a small subset of people who are legit just bad, right?
Lacking in empathy,
usually they get fired for some reason or another. I mean, they usually don't last. People have good intentions. These are all things that as humans, we just can't control fully. So that helps kind of set the tone for how you have to approach it. And I think if anything, it just teaches you a lot about, like, one of my earliest roles was in sales. And it was probably one of the most valuable things I could do. Especially as a woman, because 100% of your job in sales is to understand what the person across the table cares about, what matters to them, why does it matter to them, what's the deeper emotional thing going on there that it matters to them, and then formulate your strategy around it. And I just kind of translated that, like, I only know a few things and then I just translated them everywhere. So I just sort of translated that approach to everything I did, knowing that, you know what, I can tell this guy maybe doesn't think that I know as much about whatever it is he does. You know what, we're going to make this one his idea. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's okay. I'm going to close the deal.
Yeah.
And I'm not ashamed of having done that. It would be cool if I didn't have to. I will say the one bad byproduct of it that I'm not super proud of is, as a woman, or probably any minority, when there's not that many of you and you're early in the days of you're just used to being the only one in the room, the only, whatever the only is, you become competitive with your own kind. Because and you don't mean to, but you look, and the first day that next woman walked into the room, you're like, all right, only one of us gets to be at the table. That's just how it works.
I see.
So now I have to be really, I got to be better than her. And that natural, your human instinct kind of kicks in. And that, I think, is one of the things that I know I fell prey to. I didn't mean to, but you could feel your head going there, Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's funny how a lot of the time someone who may not be a naturally competitive person, when put in a certain environment or in a certain context, it can kind of bring something out of you, right? It can kind of bring an instinct out of you that you didn't necessarily know was there, you know. And I think that certainly when you're exposed to those kinds of environments over time, it can almost change you quite a deep level. So did you feel like over the, you know, maybe from the time you started at Amazon onwards, or from any specific point onwards, did you feel like that the corporate environment kind of filtered into your personality in a certain way?
It's interesting. I do feel both things happened. Like, I was
Okay.
attracted to the environment that fit my strengths well.
Yeah.
I am naturally incredibly competitive.
Mm-hmm.
I love a good fight, all those things. I do think the environment also then, like I had mentioned earlier, influenced me. I took things from it that I translated to my life that I do think are very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
How I solve problems, how I approach a debate like a
Mm-hmm.
salesperson, how I build mechanisms for myself, how I
Mm-hmm.
build systems for myself. Those are all highly influenced by the things I had to practice to succeed within that environment.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I can't stress enough, it was actually like overall like a super positive experience for
Mm-hmm.
me. I would say I got lucky later in my career, the last 7 years as I worked on Go. It was the first time that it was the first time I really was responsible for this whole thing and all these people in
Mm-hmm.
a way that was just a little different before. And that gave me the luxury to, or the responsibility to step back and say, stop worrying about yourself. This isn't about you
Mm-hmm.
anymore. You know, this is now thinking about all these other people far more than you had to in the past, which was awesome.
Sure. Yeah. And something you kind of touched on there a little bit in the sense of thinking about the project of working on Amazon Go altogether, which I don't know if you want to give like a brief overview for people of what that is as well, but taking on that project, a huge project, something that's never been done before. How did you approach that on a personal level? Was there a lot of like, oh man, there's a lot of responsibility on me for this, or was it more of like an exciting challenge?
Um, it was both, more the
Mm-hmm.
latter than the former.
Okay.
So quick overview. I had left Amazon in 2011
Mm-hmm.
to, I'm a little bit driven by whimsy, but to go to art school full time.
Wow.
So
Okay.
I spent the year like painting naked people, and it was great. And I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life, actually. But then I got a call from a guy who I hadn't actually worked with, but one of the senior people at Amazon saying, "Hey, Amazon, Jeff and the S team, who's a leadership team, think it's time that we evaluate if we should do physical retail. Want to come figure it out?"
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Yeah." Because I didn't give it really any thought, because I asked him. I remember saying to him, I was like, "Okay, what's the job you want me to do?" He's like, "I don't know. You have to figure that out." And I was like,
Okay.
"Well, what's your job?" He's like, "Well, actually, I'm moving to France for a year because I had a sabbatical planned." I was like, "Okay." I was like, "Do we know what we want to do?" He's like, "No, no, no, no. We'll figure that out." I was like, "Yeah, I'm in." Right?
Okay.
I mean, super cool. So I came back, and it was mostly excitement, but I was also terrified. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, at first I was the first employee. Then we hired our tech leader, who was basically my work husband for the next 7 years. Um, and we had no idea what we were going to do or how we were going to do it. Luckily, that's like my favorite time, but yeah, it's scary
Mm-hmm.
as hell. And you also have to be okay with massive failure being a possibility. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I went into it very comfortable knowing in 6 months I might not have a job.
Mm-hmm.
In
Wow.
say,
Yeah.
we could throw this away in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, at any given time, you just have to be ready to throw it in the trash when you're in that kind of space. Like, maybe we didn't come up with the best idea.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't
Yeah.
the first time Amazon had asked if we should get into physical retail. All the other times, we just didn't think we had anything interesting to do.
Wow.
So, luckily, again, tech is an environment where failure is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
I've launched many things that aren't around anymore. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay. Like, that's the nature of the beast. So, but you got to be cool with that. And leading a team through that, especially personalities that don't love that ambiguity, is a super interesting challenge.
Yeah, I'm sure. Did you have any on the occasions where something didn't pan out and it did result in something that you might be able to attach the label of failure to? Um, how did you manage that? Did you have a specific sort of coping strategy for when something didn't go right, or was it more just like move on to the next thing?
It was a little more move on to the next thing. And I think this is where you do help people's mental health through the way you
Mm-hmm.
structure and lead your team. So, as an example, let's say we were trying a technology to make Amazon Go work, which for those who don't know is a store you go into and take things off the shelf and you walk out without
Mm-hmm.
having to stop at a and use money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you'd have very specific metrics. All right, we're going to try A, B, and C. If it does this, we're going to go no. We have a go no go date. Like,
Mm-hmm.
are we continuing or
Okay.
are we not? So you set expectations early of this is a go no go date, and you've got your other ideas in the hopper that you're ready to go. There were a few times where it was hard. Like there were definitely days. Dilip, who was my technical partner, we grew very close over the years and learned each other's things. There were days I went into his office. He had like a secret corner where there was a yoga mat that he would curl up on. And if you walked by his office, you couldn't see him.
Ah.
So I would go into his office and be like, can I have your corner? Or he'd come in my office and say, I need a effing hug.
Yeah.
Like there were just days you knew, and you couldn't, as the leaders, you can't show that to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me personally, my best coping mechanism was knowing I have many, many people out there who are going to look to me to get comforted.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I don't get to flip out here. The only person I get to flip out to is like Dilip, my friend here.
Mm-hmm.
So we did that for each other many times over the years. That was my little outlet. And then you have this great distraction of, I got to put on my game face. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go help the rest of the team now get through this ambiguity and get through this setback. And that's a great distraction.
Yeah, right. Having the ability to make it about somebody else, make it about everybody else. It's always, it's something like, it's funny because my wife's probably listening into this. She's most likely in the chat. And I think we've always had a thing in our relationship where as soon as the other one is in distress, it makes each of us forget about whatever's going on for us. And we're like, okay, I just got to take care of this person right now. Right. And
exactly.
There's a kind of version of that, I'm sure, that happens in these team environments. And in my own experience working in teams, it's kind of been the same way where when the team is in distress, the individual becomes like, it's easier to forget about what's going on with you. And you just like, it's all about the team now, So I think that's one of the more powerful things about having a collaboration environment like that going on,
And miraculously, by the time you work through what you're going to tell your team, mm-hmm. you've helped yourself.
Yeah.
Like if I have to sit down, if I know I'm doing an all hands where everyone's going to be in a room or an auditorium and I have to speak to them all, mm-hmm. well, by the time I figure out what I'm going to say, I feel pretty damn good about it, right? And I probably helped myself. So it's like, dual purpose.
Yeah, exactly. So something else that's interesting, over the course of what we've been talking about, I've heard you mention the name Jeff a couple times. Now, for everybody in chat, that is Jeff Bezos. I'm correct in saying that, right? When you talk about Jeff. So obviously, I think most people in chat here will not be in a position where they've been on first name terms with a guy who is as widely known as someone like Jeff Bezos. There's a lot that goes around in the media about his position as, I think right now, I think he's the wealthiest man on the planet, right? So
I think so, yeah.
He's pretty well known. The company is very well known. The company is Amazon the biggest company on the planet? I'm not sure about that.
No, I'm pretty sure Walmart's still bigger.
Oh, really?
And
wow, okay.
I think anyway, I don't know. I'm kind of on or off, so I don't pay any attention.
Yeah, fair enough. It's all good. So what I'm curious about, I guess, is when it comes to the way that the media image of someone like that develops as it correlates to the reality. Like, you worked with Jeff Bezos for a long time. Do you feel like the sort of way that he is held up in the media is unfair in some way? Do you think the media doesn't treat him very well? I'm curious about what the experience you have is.
I don't know how qualified I am to answer that. I'll give you my personal experience with him.
Yeah.
And then I'll try to think about if I have an opinion on that. And again, you have to remember it spanned 15 years.
Right, yeah. So it's a deep experience with him. Like, you know him pretty well, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, but it was also when he wasn't at all the richest guy in the
I see.
world
Yeah.
to when he was, right?
Yeah.
I would say it largely 100% positive
Hmm.
from a selfish perspective.
Right.
Like I
Hmm.
considered myself very lucky, especially when I was really junior,
Hmm.
to be in the room with legit the most intimidatingly intelligent person I've ever met in real life.
Wow. Okay. Hmm.
Like there's just the way he thinks through things, the way he can look at something and identify immediately the cogent, salient question to
Hmm.
answer, his instincts. He wasn't right 100% of the time, don't get me
Hmm.
wrong, and I don't think he'd say he was either. But I'm a kind of selfish by nature. I work hard not to be, but I
Hmm.
kind of answer the question selfishly first, which is I got a lot out of
Sure.
as a business person, as a
Hmm.
product thinker, even at times as a human. I got a lot out of being in a room and getting to debate and sometimes argue
Hmm.
and sometimes agree with someone I considered to have a lot more of a much bigger brain than me
Hmm.
in a lot of ways, and someone who would listen to me in the couple of times, where he might have thought I knew a little more, right?
Right.
Still showing humility.
Hmm.
um so I think if I read things like the Everything Store and all the articles about Amazon, and I say this about anything, it's never going to be, it's
Right.
never going to be real. There were,
Hmm.
speaking from my own experience, there were so many articles written about Amazon Go, our store,
Hmm.
and the process and what role Jeff played and all this, where I could tell, I'm like, okay, whoever leaked this, they weren't in the room, but they knew a person or two who might have been in the room half the time.
I see. Yeah.
Right. So,
Hmm.
like, you can see, okay, there's elements of truth there.
Hmm.
But but you also can see the elements that are wrong. So
Hmm.
the experience of actually having to see some of that and do interviews and have had some things written about me in the past that maybe aren't totally true, I probably have a bit more
Hmm.
leeway to say I would have to learn on almost anything.
Yeah.
There's nuance, and we cannot assume the reporter has things 100%
Hmm.
correct here. Um, so I don't think it's my place to judge if the media has been unfair to him. I
Hmm.
think the media is at a disadvantage because they don't know everything
Right.
and they
Hmm.
don't know 100% the truth, and they are reliant on the people who choose to speak to them.
Hmm.
So I kind of look at everything, like I read the Everything Store, which was very controversial because it was all about how the Amazon culture, and it told all these crazy stories and about how awful and high pressure and mean the environment was.
Uh-huh.
And I even remembered some of the stories,
Hmm.
but it was like 5 stories over 15 years. So,
Right.
and it's not that that book wasn't true or that journalists are lying,
Yeah.
but you can't know everything unless you're in the room. And I got
Hmm.
burned once or twice on it, and it brought it home, just like anything else, right? When you
Right.
feel it yourself, you have a
Hmm.
whole different idea of what it might feel like.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really interesting to hear, and certainly in the respect of you having your own experiences with things being misrepresented in the media. Did you ever run into a time where you read something about yourself that wasn't true, and you were like, did that mess with your head at all? Because it would mess with my head if I read that.
Oh yeah, yeah, no, it totally did. I mean, luckily I'm like a nobody, right? So like nobody is, so it's not like something being written about Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates that
Hmm.
isn't true and like the whole world knows.
Right.
Like nobody's gonna retweet me, which is awesome. Um but yeah, no, it's full on messed with my head.
Hmm.
I mean, there were two instances, and they happened to both be personal situations that I was written about in the press that were either 100% untrue or partially untrue, where
Hmm.
I used to joke there were three people who'd get the phone picked up for them immediately in the office when we still used phones.
Uh-huh.
One was Jeff, one was our chief counsel, and one was the head of public relations.
Okay.
And
Right.
those, like, no matter what, you didn't skip those calls. And
Yeah.
I had two with the head of public relations, and I remember crying my eyes out on the phone with him, saying,
Wow.
I was like, Craig, how many people have seen this? And he was
Hmm.
like, I'm so sorry, but like the whole world has seen it. And the world meaning tech at that time,
Right.
which was
Yeah.
a little bubble. And I just cried. I closed my office door. I hid under the desk. I cried my eyes out, and I moved on.
Wow. And
What
it
are you
was
gonna do?
this was something that was completely untrue. And
It was a Silicon Valley gossip rag that thought they had an interesting angle on me and
okay.
Brian, and it was stupid. It was small. It was nobody in the world would ever care. Like but
Mm-hmm.
I did.
Yeah.
It bothered me. And but then you ask yourself, and I got good at this over the years, I'm like, what the hell am I going to do about this?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely nothing. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
had a good cry.
Yeah.
There's quite literally nothing else I'm going to do. And there's nothing I can do to take it off the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm nobody, so no one's going to see it in a day anyway. So move on.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because I think we all have these ideas in our minds of like, what is the worst case scenario of something really embarrassing that could happen. And I think like something untrue about us being circulated in the media is like up there with the worst nightmare of a lot of people. Right. But it strikes me that, in a lot of times in my own life, when when you're really afraid of something and then it happens and then you realize that the world didn't end,
Yeah.
like that in itself is a really powerful experience because you come out of it and you're like, oh, look at that. I got through it and now I don't have to be afraid of this thing anymore. Right. Did you kind of feel
Yep.
that same thing about that experience?
I did, and I think your observation is spot on. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I always am amazed when I look back at something like, I don't know how I got through that. I'm a freaking rock star. This one, it wasn't a one and done for me. My personality type, I struggle very deeply with looking stupid,
Mm-hmm.
or it's one of my big obstacles in playing poker. Like, I it's one of my top personality traits that I hate, that I care very much that people think I'm smart. I
Mm-hmm.
care very much that I don't sound dumb. And I go into a tailspin
Mm-hmm.
if if I feel like I have not hit that goal. So and luckily again, I'm nobody, so this didn't happen a lot. But using the press example, I would say that if it happened again, I'd probably go through the same cycle but lessened,
Mm-hmm.
because I go through it constantly, like kind of throughout my day all the
Mm-hmm. Right.
time.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I think that it's funny because I think that the world we live in now, the world that is so where everything we do is so dictated by different forms of media, right? We're always consuming information. We're always um, consuming things from social media, from like traditional media outlets, TV, whatever. And we all have this tendency to kind of relate it to ourselves, and we we have this version of the world that exists that is created as a product of all these different media sources that we consume. And then the sort of assumption, I guess, is that if something that is untrue about us is out there in that space, then that's the reality now, because that's what everybody perceives. That's what everybody believes. It's that world that is out there in the media and not the actual reality, So did you ever find that you had to, maybe in the quote unquote real world, like with the people that you actually interact with, was there any like blowback or feedback from that media incident with the actual people who are around you, or was it very much like two separate worlds?
oh no, two separate worlds. Like
Mm-hmm.
anyone, and again, I can't emphasize enough. This is just like a couple little things. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not important enough for this to be a big deal. But no, it was totally cool. I mean, one of them, like, we joked a lot about eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And what I tried to do was just defray the awkwardness,
Mm-hmm.
like with my group and my team and stuff, and be like, yeah, I know everyone saw it. Like, just move on,
Yeah.
like, what are you
Right.
going to do? And
Mm-hmm.
luckily it was only a couple little instances. I have no idea how celebrities or people who put themselves in the spotlight, I don't know if I have the mental fortitude to deal with the barrage of that on a daily basis, though. I can be totally honest about that. I'm not I admire their strength,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah, I think I can only assume that. I mean, I'm the same. I would hate to be in that position, and I can only assume that it's probably a case for them of doing the same thing that we do for management of mental health stuff. It's probably about creating a system, right? I imagine that
Probably.
a lot of them have some kind of system to completely insulate themselves from everything that the media says about them, because once you get to a point where your life becomes entertainment for other people, and I'm kind of aware of the irony of me saying that as a streamer, but like once you get to that point, it's like you can't really go back. Once people know who you are, you can't like shrink away again completely. So it's an interesting kind of dynamic from the world that we live in. And I think particularly with your experience, kind of seeing the tech industry from the inside over the past 15 years or so, as the tech industry has obviously grown to become, one of the biggest biggest industries on the planet, I guess, as a whole. Do you feel like you've noticed changes in the way people interact within the industry, kind of mirroring that, just the way that tech has sort of started to dominate the world, in so many other ways as well?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, I think the industry has evolved to the degree it has to continue to build great products, right? So like, if you're inside one company, by definition, if you're not evolving, like you're probably going to be dead pretty soon, right? So I think again, pragmatism says you must evolve. When it comes to the area of specifically mental health and some of these more personal things, I would say the industry got the memo. At least during the time I was part of it. I think it will be very interesting to see how it continues to evolve. And like I said, I'm super interested to understand the effects of quarantine and working at home and COVID. I still keep in touch with a lot of people, and life has changed pretty freaking dramatically for them as far as how this goes, and what does the new work group look like, and what are some of our people thriving? Like, I'm very curious if some of the folks on the teams maybe never choose to come back, and how are we going to accommodate, how are we going to create, this is a question I am actually interested in, but how are we going to create new work environments that offer the flexibility? We help people understand who they are and how they function best, and then continue to create an environment that enables them to do that. So for example, I can only think about really hard problems in the morning hours and if I'm by myself. And I had the flexibility to work at home whenever the hell I wanted. That's a super simple example of me knowing a limit of something to do with me that I could control. So watching the industry continue to adapt to the needs of people, I think is going to be cool, because there's so much more available to do it now. You can work from anywhere. You can do lots of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for young people in particular, I would expect that, I would hope that the impact of COVID as a whole is going to be one that allows us to have a greater variety of work environments available to people, that hopefully allow people to find opportunities that are more suited to their particular working style, right? Because I think that certainly it sounds like, from your experience, when you first came into the tech industry, certainly in respect of your experiences being a woman in tech, and maybe in some other areas too, it sounds like there was at least a certain amount of adjustment that you had to do to fit the demands of the industry, as opposed to the industry being able to adapt and bend its requirements to allow you to function, right off the bat, I suppose, and I would hope that young people right now who are maybe a little bit skeptical or a little bit nervous about kind of entering into work environments when there's maybe the perception that these are really high pressure environments. I think that there's some reason to be positive too, because we've got research coming out all the time that tells us new things about what produces higher productivity in work environments. You've got a lot of like European countries experimenting with like 6-hour work days and all this other stuff. So I'm curious, maybe from your experience, how much sort of experimentation was there during your time at Amazon in just trying new things with people's working arrangements to try to see what works best? Was there an element of, let's just try this and see if people working from home does better, or was there something like that?
I would say there was flexibility, less experimentation. It wasn't that structured, and more flexibility. And the primary reason being is things like this, at least at Amazon, didn't happen at a corporate level.
Right.
Like if I wanted to do that, I did it. And if someone on my team, if I didn't have the idea, if someone on my team had the idea, they could say, how about we try this? Or one group in my group could try it. So I would say there was tons of experimentation and tons of trying stuff, but at least in a company like Amazon that's run in such a decentralized fashion, they didn't typically tend to be mandates or rules from the top. What would happen is you'd find, like that work-life norms thing I mentioned.
Yeah.
One group made that up. I don't even know who it was. But then all of a sudden, Somebody passes it to something. This is actually how it happens. Like somebody's like, oh, that's a good idea. That team has that. Let's do it on ours.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody else finds it. So I think the best ideas end up being the ones that go viral,
Mm-hmm.
and they become standards on
Right.
their own.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall anything that was sort of like a mandate that said we have to do it this way or whatever. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure there were some. I just don't. I recall much more freedom that we could kind of try
Sure.
things as long as you deliver your results.
Right.
Like at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the day, if you deliver the result, whatever it is, and there's a very careful metric, I assure you,
Mm-hmm.
and you weren't hurting anybody or causing harm or hurting customers, like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair enough. I think,
experiment away.
yeah. And what's funny is I think that the perception people have of the corporate world from outside is maybe that it's kind of the inverse, right? I think people have the perception that the corporate world is very authoritarian, and you have all these mandates from, the corporate headquarters that everything has to be done in a certain way, and things like that. And it's kind of nice, I think, to hear that, maybe just for the sake, especially of people who I know we have some younger viewers in the chat, people who might be a little bit, apprehensive, I guess is the word, about what their work life might look like in the future when they have to be working a 9 to 5, or they have to find themselves in some kind of corporate environment. I think it's sort of nice to know that even that within the most successful companies, as opposed to working in that kind of sense where there's a very regimented sort of pattern that you have to follow, and your freedom is restricted, and you don't have the room to experiment and things like that. It almost sounds like it's kind of the inverse, where whatever you do that's going to get the desired result is kind of okay, like you say.
And not only is it okay, creativity and trying something completely new is rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
So the more creative and the more innovative and the more willing you are to kind of take chances, educated, thoughtful, smart chances, the more you're seen as an innovator and someone who can
Right.
build things, and someone, I mean, there were awards for it. We had
Mm-hmm.
awards that Jeff Bezos would give out to employees who were nominated for just making up a new idea. Like
Mm-hmm.
my favorite one was this guy from operations. Operations is like, where
Mm-hmm.
all the boxes running around on conveyor belts, whatever.
Right.
This was ages ago when we used to put a book in with like pillows, to keep the
Mm-hmm.
book from flying around. And he won an award that was called the Just Do It Award. And the Just Do It Award meant you didn't ask anyone's permission. You just went ahead and made something and then
Mm-hmm.
brought it to the table, and you made things better for customers.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy got up on stage to accept his award, and he held up a piece of cardboard with a book on it that was shrink wrapped.
Yeah.
And he said, we used to ship air.
Yeah.
Now we don't ship air, and it's better. And got off the stage. And I was like,
yeah, I mean, well done to that guy.
yeah, like there was so many so not only was it encouraged, and this again is only, I think a lot of tech companies function this way, but this is very specific to Amazon. It was applauded. It got you rewarded and recognized for not doing things the quote unquote typical way. If you had a better way. Now, if you just kept doing things your own way and it was stupid and inefficient, that was the winning strategy.
Yeah,
you have to actually improve the system.
Yeah. That, I mean, certainly I think that kind of harnessing of creativity and everything sounds like a very rewarding environment to work in as a whole.
I would say for folks who are younger, ask a lot of questions, read a lot. Nowadays, we didn't have this like way back in the day, but you can go on chat, you can find out a lot from people online, reading if there's books about the company, like in the case of the places I worked. Don't be afraid to ask questions about how the culture functions. What does the organizational structure look like? Is it 20 layers deep? That's going to tell you something about how the company functions.
Yeah.
Amazon only had, you could be a level 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No, 9, 10. There were 7 levels.
Okay.
And then Jeff. So that's a pretty flat structure. That tells you something about what that company is going to function like. It tells you there's probably a lot of freedom and a lot of control and ownership. It tells you there's probably also going to be a little disarray and chaos at times, or it's going to feel like it because there aren't big mandates from the top. So don't be afraid to ask and map it to your own sort of happy place.
Okay. Yeah, that's great advice. I think as a whole, certainly speaking to my own experience, like I don't think there was, I mean, obviously this is the UK, so it's very, very different, but there wasn't a lot of, I always felt when I was coming through college and things like that, that the corporate world, or the world of like the world of jobs and the quote unquote real world was like very opaque, in the sense that there wasn't a lot of communication from people in that environment that was accessible to younger people, that was showing us that this environment could be something that was fun and enjoyable and rewarding in a lot of like positive ways. And I think that what ended up happening was, I mean, obviously a lot of this had to do with the fact that I graduated college in 2009, right after the financial crash and everything, right? But I think a lot of people in my generation particularly kind of came out of college with this impression that the corporate world is a world that it's hard to reconcile it with a fulfilling and happy and rewarding kind of existence, and it seems like, on the other hand, your experience is one where you really did seem to be able to manage to find a way to really get a rewarding experience out of that. So I'm curious if there was any one particular perspective or approach that you think that you took that helped you to really get the most out of that experience over your career.
That's a good question. I think there's a couple of things. I was, like I said, I failed a lot, and I'm an experiential learner, so I have to like do things wrong to actually get the point, because I'm dense. But one thing I did know about myself very early, and I encourage folks who are younger to think about this, is I have a tendency to be a workaholic. I'm very poor with moderation in all its forms. I'm like a light switch. I'm on or I'm off, and there's very little gray area with how I function in anything. And I knew that about myself young, and that actually made me go the corporate route. In college, my friends all thought for sure I'd be the person to do a startup, start my own thing. And somehow I knew, even at that young age when I was pretty dumb, that would not be good for me, because if I were the startup leader, I would be forced to eat, sleep, breathe, and drink that business. There would be no vacation. There would be no, like, I knew I didn't have the wherewithal to control that for myself, where at least at a corporation, I could take a 2-week vacation and the company ain't going to fall apart. They're going to be just fine. And that was actually sort of a big pivot point for me, saying, you need to go to a big company, because you're not, at the time I wasn't sure I could mentally handle. So I think one lesson is, if you know some things about yourself, think about how those things apply to the environments that you can choose. There's so many more options now, right? So it's a little more complicated than when I had to think about this. But if you know some of those few things, even if you're still confused, don't ignore them. Because I actually thought, and I can always change my mind, right? Well, I didn't change my mind, because I didn't fix that about myself totally yet. And it frankly still, holds true. So I think trying to think about whether it be your hot buttons or your happy place, and start from the back and work forward. Say, like, what are the environments that cater to this thing about myself that are good, and then make them fit you, because nowadays you can, which is super, super cool. Because corporate's not going to be for everybody, and everyone's going to have their own reason it is or isn't. I also came out of my first marriage. I was coming out of a divorce and a bunch of things, and I craved security. I came from a situation where I was very financially insecure. And I knew that for my sanity, I needed security. Well, startups and starting my own thing at that time was not secure. And I prioritized that, isn't it? Yeah. So, I think wherever you are right now, those are the few things to think about. And then if there's not a match, question yourself really deeply about, can I handle that mismatch?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. I actually think normally I do a whole thing where I ask somebody to end with some kind of positive insight for everybody, but I think that's a great one to end on. I think just the idea that the environment now is such that there's a lot of availability for people to choose a pathway that works for them, and it seems like you were able to find one that works for you, and I hope that the people in our chat who are, I know we have some people who within a few years at least will be making their way out into trying to find how they want to make a living, and it's gratifying to know that someone like yourself still has this perspective that there is a wide variety of really rewarding work out there. And I don't think this image of the corporate world as being this big crushing thing that destroys everybody's joy and things like that. It's nice to know that that's not the reality, you know?
Well, and if you end up in a place that is destroying your joy, get the hell out.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, we shouldn't pretend that there's no jobs out there that are like that. And obviously, you know, I hope nobody gets stuck in those jobs. But with any luck, the companies that are crushing the joy of their employees won't be sticking around too long. I think that seems to be how it works. So yeah, I think that's a good note to end on. So thank you very, very much. I really appreciate you being here with us. It was really interesting to talk about all this stuff. I'm sure you and I will talk again soon. So thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Cool.
And I like the new look.
Yes, the new look is partly because you can blame my stream chat for that. One of my other poker students actually in stream chat, he was sitting here watching me one day, and evidently he was drinking and decided that he wanted to. He said, if I donate X amount, like to get me to my donation goal, which was enough to get a PS5, will you shave your beard? And so I was like, all right, it's like $400 he's going to donate to shave my beard. So there we go. The beard is gone.
I like it.
The beard will be back. It'll be back. Don't worry. Cause when I first did it, I looked like a 12-year-old. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And I've got a little bit of stubble going on here now. So I'm just waiting until, in fact, I need to get to Brian's level, right? Brian's got the big quarantine beard going right now.
He finally shaved it.
Oh,
he couldn't take it anymore.
Oh,
he was shedding, and he was like, this is work, and now I'm supposed to buy beard oil. He was like, hell no.
Okay.
I gave myself a GI Jane recently, and it's kind of a disaster right now. So I feel you.
Is that why the hat? Is that what that's for? Okay.
Turns out if you just take clippers and do this, it doesn't grow back pretty.
Oh yeah, that seems a little haphazard, but yeah, I mean, I just go nuclear on it and just get rid of all of it, so I don't have to worry about that. Anyway, we will have your husband on, Brian, at some point. I'll be in touch, and I'll let you know when is a good time to get him on. I'm sure he has a lot of good stories to tell as well. So thank you once again for being here.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who was listening. Take care, man.
We'll let you hop off the Zoom call, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, guys. That was Gianna Puerini. Obviously, really great to talk to. Great insight, I think, about the corporate world and about Amazon and about what it's like to work in that kind of environment. I'm just going to switch. There we go. That's a slightly better view of me right here. So thank you guys for tuning in for that. Jennifer, I see you in chat. I see you with the emotes. I'm going to drop one in there myself. So yeah, thank you everybody for being here for that. Really interesting interview. I'm curious what you guys' thoughts were. If you guys have any experience with these kind of corporate environments that Gianna's talking about there, it would be really interesting to hear what your thoughts are on that. What we're going to do now, stream-wise, is go into the more sort of, I guess, more relaxed portion of the day. We're going to play some Zelda. We're going to hop off stream briefly because I need to get the Zoom call wrapped up, and I need to go back into Streamlabs in a normal fashion. But we're going to play some more Breath of the Wild, and I hope you guys will stick around. We're going to have a nice chill afternoon here of trying to get a little bit further through this game, and I hope you guys will stick around to enjoy that with me. So I'm going to jump off and then quickly reboot the stream. Yeah, insert hype video here. That's exactly what I need. You're absolutely right, FTB. Hype video needs to go here to keep people interested, but nevertheless, the hype video will come soon. All right, thanks guys.